Hello, fine friends. This is the Vermont Center for Photography. My name is Josh Farr. I'm the director here, and we're so happy that you were able to join us this evening. And it's not maybe a little bit actively precipitating or snowing or blizzarding yet this evening, so we're safe. But we had a serendipitous turn of events that we discovered that our friend Matt Eich was gallivanting across New England from Virginia, from Pullman, Virginia, and we reached out to him several weeks ago spontaneously, and we said, is there any way we can intercept your path through New England to come and give a talk at VCP? And he very graciously agreed. So we thank him for that. And a few little tidbits about our friend here. Like I mentioned, over the past week and a half, he's been traveling throughout New England, and we're thrilled that he's able to stop by on his way back eventually towards Charlottesville, Virginia. His prints are held in public collections, including the Chrysler Museum of Art, the Cleveland Museum of Art, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, Texas. His work has been recognized with support from the Aaron Siskind Fellowship, 2 Getty Images Grants, and 2 VMFA Professional Fellowships, among others. And he currently teaches at the Corcoran School of the Arts and Design at George Washington University, and publishes many of these beautiful books you see here through his own imprint, Little Oak.PRESS, which we will be having available, presumably for purchase, and he'd be happy to sign in them for you afterwards. So you're welcome to hang out, chat more with Lynn, buy a book, get it signed, inscribed. But thank you again all for being here. Restrooms just around the corner this way, fire escape is that way, and just enjoy yourselves. But thank you again. Help me welcome Matt Eich.
Hey folks, thanks for coming out. Josh, thanks for the intro. I like the like exit signs there. Helps in case we do need to make a quick move. Appreciate you all coming out on a cold evening. It's been a while since I've given a presentation. I am on sabbatical from teaching right now, so I've got my teaching hat off, and I've been trying to rediscover the artist. So I've been on the road for the last 11 or so days. I can't actually remember what day of the week it is, so please bear with me if I start to ramble. This is me. I'm Matt Eich. It's pronounced Eich. I make photobooks, and they usually have some relationship to memory, family, community, and the American condition. I've published 5 books and have probably half a dozen in various stages of disarray at this point, and I've worked as a photographer for 20-ish years, starting from my local newspaper and then for a range of other places. As mentioned, my day job is at Corcoran School of the Arts and Design in DC, and I'm on sabbatical. So for the next year, I've got a little extra bandwidth to try and explore my creative practice and figure out what I'm interested in right now. And back home, my wife Melissa and our daughters Madeline and Mira are hanging out with our large cat Spirit and our dog Corky. And generally I enjoy nurturing things and watching them grow. So this is a family portrait on my 36th birthday a few years ago, and this was a quick family self-portrait before I left on this trip. The film just came back from the lab, so everybody's a little older, and we managed to get the dog and the cat in this one. This is a quick studio view of some of the mess as I was getting ready to leave for this trip, but I'll probably reference these edit walls at some point in the talk. They're a pretty critical part of my practice as I'm thinking about how do I take a kind of nebulous idea or body of work that's thousands of pictures and whittle it down to something that could become a publication or an exhibition, but it largely unfolds kind of on the wall. So to take you all back to kind of my beginning relationship with photography, this is 2 photographs of my grandmother, Ruth Munger Martin. I called her Mama. And I believe both of them were made by my grandfather. I know the one on the right was, the one on the left was their wedding day. And these were photographs that I found in a trunk in their bedroom on the day of his funeral. It was like right under this window curtain that he had a large wooden trunk. But my relationship to photography began when I was about 10 years old. My grandmother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and she was kind of in the later stages when my grandfather took me on a road trip, and he handed me a little point-and-shoot camera. And I still remember the feeling of getting that film back from the lab and being like emotionally transported to the place that I was when I pushed the button. And there was some small act of magic in that for me as a young person, and I wanted to know what that was about. Of course, that has some tie to memory, right? But it became kind of clear to me that memory is core to our identity, and as I watched her identity be erased by the disease, I started to think maybe photography was capable of being breadcrumbs spread along the trail if we were to find ourselves lost. So this is a picture of my grandmother in her later years, kind of right before she passed away. So I grew up in Suffolk and Smithfield, Virginia. A little place is known for peanuts and pork farming and not much else, and I was pretty introverted. So I photographed a lot of nature, flowers, frogs, turtles, and things, and kind of figured out some technical stuff, starting with slide film. This is an early self-portrait. And the obsession kind of grew over the years. I played a lot of music in high school, and then at the end of high school, I felt like I had to choose between playing music and making photographs, and I was tired of the metal band drama at that time, so I thought photography seems like a good way to kind of keep minimal drama and make something that maybe has a social function. There was definitely an interest in my young brain, like I wanted to do something that had a reason. It wasn't just for me, but I wanted to have some sort of social function to the work. So I started studying photojournalism at Ohio University in 2004, and I began working for my local newspaper, the Virginian Pilot, in 2005. And that was really where I kind of first was exposed to photojournalism, was through the newspaper basket in my parents' living room every day. Amazing photojournalism would just land there, great stories about my community, and it was really interesting to be able to see the place that I grew up depicted through other people's eyes, and so that was kind of an early reference point for me. So when I started school, still super introverted, not sure how to communicate with strangers, and I began photographing the college town that I was in. I was studying at Ohio University, so we were in Athens, Ohio, in the Appalachian foothills, about an hour and a half south of Columbus. And these pictures began as part of a class project, and then another class project, and another class project, and it spanned a decade in the end. The book was released in 2016 as the first in a 4-part series called The Invisible Yoke, and I will share a bit of those books with you all today. They were all published by this Swiss imprint called Sturm und Drang, and we've got the limited edition slipcase here. These photographs were made, in that time around the recession, which is when I graduated. For anybody aspiring to be an artist or photojournalist, it was a really great time to think about newspapers and, entering the world of media and communications. But I had also met my wife in school, and we found out really quickly that we were going to be parents, and so felt like we had to kind of jump and get to it. And so I started freelancing as quickly as I could. We graduated, we moved to Virginia, kind of close to where I grew up. But I continued going back to Ohio for a few years after we graduated to keep making these photographs. And I know there's at least one Hartford alum in the room who's probably heard this hammered in through crits, but one of the things that was said to me in grad school and said to all of us is the pictures are smarter than you are. Listen to them and they'll tell you where you need to go. And I hadn't been told that in undergrad. In undergrad, we were told basically how to use a camera, how to make pictures prolifically, but not how to think about them and not how to talk about them. And so when I went to graduate school, I was really interested in expanding my kind of visual vocabulary and also thinking more about how these pictures connect. And there was something subconsciously going on early on that I wasn't really tuned into, but the photographs started calling one another out to me. So as I began this second series in Mississippi, there were pictures that I was making there that were echoing photographs I'd made in Ohio. And I had to start asking myself, what is that about, right? Is it just my obsessions? And what does that say about me? But also, what does it say about America and kind of what this place looks like and feels like? So these photographs spanned from a short editorial assignment. It was initially like 3 days, and I delivered the work to the editor, and he was fine with it, but I said, I think there's something more here if you give me some extra time. And so I was sent back for a few days. I made prints for a lot of the folks that I'd met in the first trip and started developing relationships with folks and continued going back over 7 years. This was a picture made early on in the project at the funeral for Demetrius Butta Anderson. He was 18 when he was murdered. He was the third person in his family to be killed. And I was invited to come back and photograph his funeral, which felt like a window into some of the violence that the community was having to cope with kind of on a day-to-day basis. After this photograph was made, the young man on the left was shot and severely injured, partially paralyzed, and the young man on the right in the dark suit coat was shot and killed in a case of mistaken identity. Somebody was gunning for his twin brother. This is Fat Man taking his first steps. This is Nikki. So these photographs were made in Greenwood, Mississippi between 2010 and 2017. Greenwood is home to the bluesman Robert Johnson, who supposedly sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads, right? And if you've seen the movie The Help, it was filmed in this neighborhood. They kept buildings standing long enough to make that movie, and then they tore them down, right? Because it still feels like a time capsule for 1963 and still bears a lot of the marks of segregation. So this book was released in 2018. And then at the same time, as these other books were developing, I was living in Hampton Roads in Virginia, which is a bunch of cities kind of all mashed together: Norfolk, Newport News, Virginia Beach, Suffolk, Smithfield. So it was the area that I grew up in. And when I graduated from high school, I could not wait to be out of there. But when I moved back, it was with a different perspective. I had a wife and a child, and I'd seen some other things, and I kind of fell back in love with this place, but in a complicated way. So we moved to Norfolk, and this whole area is kind of separated and connected by water. It's just kind of part of the DNA of this region. It's home to the largest naval base in the world. This is my father in the James River, which is near where I grew up. And this was also the first body of work where I really felt like I could weave my own family's kind of presence into the pictures, because we were part of the community, and I was photographing my life as well as kind of everything that was unfolding around. So I would go to, live music or political rallies or whatever I could get my hands on to photograph. And this was a super developmental time for me because of the people that I was surrounded by. When I graduated from undergrad, again, in a recession, thought I'm going to be a newspaper photographer, the Virginian Pilot, my hometown newspaper, that's where I want to be, right? That was my dream. And so right after I moved back with a wife and a kid into a recession, they had an opening of all things. I was like, cool, I'm going to apply for this. And I did not get hired. And looking back, that was probably one of the best things that happened to me. But at the time, I was, thinking, okay, this is going to be interesting, trying to support a family on a freelancer salary. But I lucked out because I got some amazing friends, colleagues, and neighbors out of the hires. They hired Preston Ganaway, Ross Taylor, and Amanda Lucier. And this is Amanda on the right, and her then partner, Josh, on the left. So Amanda was a newspaper photographer. We actually shared a back fence, and we started to host these events called Hop the Fence Photo Night. She had a garage with a fridge that would kind of empty out of beer every time we had an event, but then magically refill itself. There was a little projector screen. People would bring work. Anybody from a high school kid to a Pulitzer Prize winner could show up at the garage and bring a slideshow and share your work, and everybody was welcome. And then we'd jump the fence to our front porch, and everybody would spend a long time drinking, smoking, and looking at photo books. So that was like the photo community at that time, but Amanda was very kind of in the loop about the projects I was making. We were always brainstorming ideas together. And so I heard she was going to this event with her partner Josh called the Navy Ball, I think. And I asked if I could make a portrait of them before they went. She was like, what if we do one better than that? We're always talking about what like dream access looks like. If you were just accepted, you didn't have to explain yourself, right? Like, I know you, I trust you. So we're gonna leave the door unlocked, come over at 4:30, let yourself in, and you can make our picture. I said, okay, that sounds lovely. And so I went over to her house, hopped the fence, let myself in. The house is quiet. I'd been there a bunch of times before, but it felt really intrusive and uncomfortable for me to like walk through her house, back to the bedroom where she and her partner Josh were waking up from a nap. He's got his shirt off, he's covered in tattoos, and his arms are wrapped around her. And I knew I was being invited in to make that picture, but it was still really very awkward to place myself in that position. And this was one of the last photographs I made before they left. The portrait wasn't that special. I kind of like walked out the door, turned around, and see y'all. And then to complete the experiment, we invited Amanda over, left our side door unlocked, so she let herself in on a Saturday morning and photographed me in bed with my wife and daughter, photographed our younger one watching cartoons. And then we had this conversation about what it means to be vulnerable in front of a camera and how absurd it is to ask this of strangers, right? But that is kind of what we do oftentimes. And so this interaction has always been kind of a North Star reminder for me as to like, it's really difficult for me to ask somebody to be vulnerable with me if I'm not willing to reciprocate, right? And this was kind of a way of practicing that. And this was also a picture that reads with a lot of tension that did not exist in the moment, but it's something that has also taught lessons because this felt like an image that spoke of a relationship breaking apart, right? A dissolution, and that actually came to be after he was redeployed. He came back with PTSD, and they separated. So this picture made months before that kind of felt like an echo or kind of a premonition of something to come. This was a funeral for Kelly Valentine, a 13-year-old who was killed while crossing the street. I was asked by the family to photograph it. It was a very somber event where like all of the mourners are, teenagers, and her favorite color was pink, so all the boys had pink ties. The whole day was overcast, but this was right as they were taking her casket out of the hearse, and the sky just opened up, and all of the kids were kind of like caught off guard by the surprise rainstorm, but it did feel appropriate for the moment. This is right around the corner from where we lived. This is a garden party at the Hermitage Museum. These AT-AT Walker looking things in the background are the cranes of the loading dock at the port there. This is a fire hose baptism in Newport News. This is the end of our street, high tide and a full moon. So after a few years of living in a floodplain, we decided that wasn't a sustainable place to be, and we moved to Charlottesville, Virginia around 2015. And this is the final book in the series. It's called Weed Free. It came out last year, but the pictures range from 2005 to 2020. And the previous 3 books were all kind of geographically centered on a specific region that felt like it embodied a microcosm of the kind of broader American experience. But this final volume breaks free of that a little bit and just looks at the country more broadly. The way it all connects to kind of the photographic origins is I've been thinking more about collective memory and how photographs function in that role of history and keeping us tethered to our identity as a country, right? As we become more politically fractured and polarized, I feel that photography has a really important role to play. So these pictures were made all over America. we boiled down hundreds of thousands of photographs to, I think it was 93 in the final book. This is Joplin, Missouri, after the tornado in 2011 where over 100 people were killed. This is the site of a church where the nursery walls had collapsed, killing several children and nursery workers. And the memorial monument left in that place was a upholstered chair with a hymnal held open by a rock to Amazing Grace. This is Groundhog Day in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. And at this time, I was photographing obsessively. This was like a lunch break in grad school. My classmates and professors are just like out of view, and I'm constantly photographing and carrying a camera, and I can't help myself. It's all 35 color digital in these first two projects, and so it kind of lent itself to that sort of ubiquity and obsessiveness. But there have been some shifts in the work that we'll talk about as we move into these other projects. This is Praying Over Breakfast in Alabama. This is after Mike Brown was murdered in Ferguson, Missouri. And this is in my hometown of Charlottesville. This is 10 days after the Unite the Right rally, where white nationalists descended on our town to defend some of the statues, including this Lee statue in the background. And this was the day of the eclipse. I was still kind of fucked up from what I'd seen a few days before, and brought my kids to the park to see the eclipse. And again, this kind of freak rainstorm came out of nowhere, and it soaked their little cereal box viewers. And this woman saw my kids trying to like safely observe the eclipse and came and offered her red, white, and blue eclipse glasses to them. Sometimes the universe just gives you things. And sometimes my wife sees things that I don't. So she called me on her way to work one morning. There's something weird going down the road. I think you should put on some pants and go see what's up. And so I did. I chased these guys down. They were being punished by their drill instructor for mouthing off. All right, so now we're transitioning into kind of more of the way that I'm looking at things these days. This is I Love You, I'm Leaving. It's definitely more personal work, and it's what I started making in graduate school. It's also kind of a more compressed period of time for me photographically. Usually my books are 5 to 10 years on average, but this was a kind of tumultuous period of time where my parents separated after 33 years of marriage. My family and I moved to a new town, kind of like disconnected us from our community and our family. And my grandfather, who introduced me to photography, passed away all during that time, and he was my last living grandparent. So it felt like a time where I was really trying to figure out who I was as a person, as a father, as a husband, and as an artist too. And so I'd referenced the trunk earlier. That's the same curtain that my grandfather photographed Mama in front of, and this is where I found those photographs. This is also the day of his funeral. And so this work I don't think would have been possible for me without going through the graduate school kind of ringer, because one of the early crits, I remember showing some like color 35 family work, and one of the comments was, "We don't give a fuck about your family photo album." I said, okay, cool. Like, what do we do with that? Like, how do I make something that feels less specific to my experience, maybe, and more universal, right? And so much of it is not in my control. It's just about being there and ready and looking, right? And life is full of these little miraculous gifts. So this was my sister's birthday in the backyard of our house. This is after my parents separated, but you see them seated next to one another. My mom is kind of leaning away on the phone. My dad seems a little more like engaged with my daughter, throwing the ball at him. They're like trying to put on a good face, but there's still this gulf kind of between them. And as I'm framing the picture, my brother-in-law is blowing bubbles for the kids next to me, and just to mess with me, he goes, boop, like, puts it right in front of the lens, right as I'm pushing the shutter. The flash pops, and kind of encapsulates them in this fragile little world that felt reflective of how I was seeing their relationship and generally wrestling with feelings of the kind of impermanence of love at that time. I was also going through a lot of photographic kind of obsessions, phases in this body of work. There was a period where I was just photographing the backs of people's heads, or like nature was a very dominant element in the work. And then a lot of very confrontational, direct gaze portraits. This was a strange role where it was my wife in the tub, right? It looks like she has a black eye, or maybe she's crying, she's like splashed water on her face and the mascara is running. But I swear with each frame on the roll, she becomes a different person. It's like she's shape-shifting throughout that act of being photographed. And it's really hard when you've got a handful of pictures that all say something different of the same person in the same scene. Like, what do you choose, right? And I found that what I always chose was kind of a mirror of how I felt at the time, right? If I felt sad and lost or lonely, that's the picture that I gravitated towards, right? And so I had to grapple also with the fact that, you know, while I'm not always putting myself in front of the camera with these family photographs, I am always projecting myself onto the people that I'm photographing. And that's a constant kind of negotiation that I have to make, because I don't want it to be all me. I want them to come through. And this is another image from the series that often is like read in a particular way, right? It almost feels like she's wearing a wedding dress and holding a bouquet. She's got a bathing suit on. That's a soggy kid's swimsuit under her arm, and she's got a towel wrapped around her, right? Like, so the picture says something, but we read it another way. All right, so this leads us into a series that I was making during grad school and after grad school. I self-published a maquette of this. It has not been published, and I'm going to kind of blast through this, but this work was made in the years leading up to and during Trump's first time in office. It is set around a poem by Langston Hughes called Let America Be America Again. It's an excellent poem. Don't have time to share it with you now, but I would encourage everybody to check it out because it feels pretty relevant for what we are experiencing today. And so these pictures, kind of like previous work about America, it's made all over the country. You know, this one was in Syracuse, New York while I was there teaching. This one was made at Hartford Art School on the way to the gallery, walking with classmates. They had a police cadet training camp going on campus. Strangest thing I've ever walked into. After Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson. And this was also kind of a departure for me because I was trying to mix color and black and white, which is difficult, I think, for Americans to do. Europeans do it better. But the work that I'm on the road making right now is going to be kind of a part 2 to that work, Say Hello. As of the second inauguration in January, it felt like we're in a different period of time. There's a new kind of visual approach that I need to take to respond to this. And so on my sabbatical, I'm doing 3 major kind of road trips to cover parts of the country that I haven't previously photographed. And that's to kind of fulfill a promise to my younger self. When I was in my late 20s, I had set the goal I was going to photograph in all 50 states by the time I was 30. And then, you know, kids and grad school and job and stuff. And so now, by the time I turn 40, I'm going to have photographed in all 50 states. So that'll be part 2 of this work. These next couple things I'm going to blast through pretty quickly. These are meant to be viewed as a duo. So Sunlight, Shadow, Rainbow is side A, and then there's a side B that's called Grace Notes. One will be a light-sided, kind of white book, and the other one's going to be printed on black paper. I'm kind of envisioning them as a do-si-do binding, so they're 1 and 2 at the same time. But these photographs, as you probably noticed, like 18 to 21, were made kind of in the years right around the pandemic, and at a time when my daughters were like rapidly changing, kind of becoming more inscrutable and kind of harder to understand, but we were also together more than usual because we were all stuck in the same space, and So there's an element of, in this work, there's a bit more kind of hope, I think. And then in the Grace Notes darker side, maybe a little bit more of that kind of uncertainty that comes with raising teenage girls and not knowing what's in store for them. And so this side debuted at the Cleveland Museum of Art in '22. The Grace Notes work, I've only shown a couple pieces from it, but we haven't done any shows. And this is kind of a little taste of some of those pictures. And as noted, they're dark photographs, which is going to present some technical challenges to print. Doesn't always make for the best screen viewing, so I do apologize. There's something uniting these pictures that I realized, again, like in looking through lots of photographs over the years, all of these were kind of on the verge of not existing. They were almost falling apart. There's barely enough light for an image to be made. But something about kind of life on the cusp of adolescence for these girls. Okay, and as a follow-up to I Love You, I'm Leaving, I've continued photographing my family in black and white, but more kind of consciously with 4x5 these days. And so these pictures, again, began around grad school. They're ongoing. I have no idea when, where, how they will ever come into the world, but I do see them as some sort of like complement to I Love You, I'm Leaving. That's just a proof scan of a fresh one, but every time she goes to a school outing, I'm that annoying dad that's like, will you stand for a 4x5 portrait? Is there enough light to make this work? And so, like these days, she's like, after I get back. And so now I'm having to like rig up lights at 11 o'clock at night to make this work. But yeah, this was the last portrait I got to make of her after a school event. All right. So this is what I really would like to share with you all. It's called Birdsong Over Black Water. This is 10 years of photographs. It's probably going to continue into early next year, but it's really what's been taking up a lot of my brain space since I started teaching. So as I may have mentioned earlier, I'm not somebody that goes out into the world with an idea, right? I go out with a camera and an empty head, and I see kind of what starts to come from the pictures. And so it was around 2020, during the pandemic, everything's locked down, that I started sitting with some pictures and realizing like, oh, there's a thread running through these things that I've been making in Virginia using these particular tools between 15 and 20. And so if I wake up and start consciously doing something, what would happen? I started reading poetry by Virginian poets and became really obsessed with this one poem called A Meditation on Song and Structure by Charles Wright. And it was from a collection called Black Zodiac that was released in '86, the year I was born. It won a Pulitzer. And so this body of work is made kind of with that poem as like a interval that hits throughout. So you'll see a little bit of text as I show the PDF. That's excerpts of the poem. As I mentioned, it's still ongoing, so what I'm sharing is a draft, and definitely something that I'm hoping to continue adding new notes to. Now, since we're doing this screen recording, I'm hopeful that this is going to continue recording it as well. Let's see. All right, and because I am personally tired of the sound of my own voice, I'm going to play some music while this book goes through, and then we can chat. So that's a draft. I think that's like version 10 or so. We'll probably hit version 20 before it ever sees the light of day. But that gives kind of an extended view of a body of work that's been taking up a lot of my time. Like what I've been showing you all this evening is mostly kind of small excerpts of things. But that gives you a kind of deeper dive. This is my info for anybody that wishes to get in touch, stay in touch. Thanks, folks.
Does anybody have thoughts, questions, comments? Please chime in.
I have a curiosity, maybe two.
Sure.
If you could talk a little bit more about the relationship they have with the subjects, because
Mhm.
it seems like you end up in a variety of situations with a lot of different people and different environments.
Mhm.
And then kind of connected to that, I remember the photo of your wife in the tub,
Mm.
and you said you picked the photograph depending on how you felt. So maybe this idea that we photograph something when we feel something, and then we see it. We see something.
Yeah. We're always looking for some clarity about ourselves moving through the world, and like photography has been the tool that gave me that gift when I was a kid because I didn't know how to interact with people right. But that doesn't mean that I always know what it's telling me necessarily, right, or how to best wield it. But as for a relationship, right, like that's kind of at the heart of it. I love meeting strangers and having that brief connection. So some of the people that we saw here, like I had a brief interaction with. Some of the people are family, friends, neighbors, people that I've known in some cases for like 10, 20 years. In the Carey, Ohio work, there's one family that I've stayed in touch with since '06. The relationship with some family members is great, and with some others it's a little tense, right? Just like one's own family. And I've also found that when photographing my own family, it's training in many ways for how I approach other people. Like my goal is always to photograph strangers with the same sort of respect and intimacy that I would depict my own loved ones. But that's a kind of high ask for a brief interaction oftentimes, right? So I'm constantly pushing closer, asking for more from myself, but also from the people, while still wrestling with that, like, how much is too much, right? Like, have you overstayed your welcome here? But it's, at least in this trip, been kind of remarkable how many folks are really open, accepting, want to be seen. And yeah, it can feel like a really kind of lovely back and forth. Again, something that we were kind of, there was a vernacular around photography at the time that I was starting in the early aughts, right? Taking pictures as opposed to making pictures, right? And so like, I would encourage folks to think about how you approach people. And I've become very aware of the way that I speak about photography impacts the way that I make the photographs. And so I'm interested in making instead of taking, hopefully a less extractive exchange, but there's always this concern that the photographs never find their way back to the people that I'm photographing. So part of the process is trying to, whenever I can, get their contact info, email them a JPEG, send them a print if they want, right? Not everybody cares, but for those that do, that's kind of a closing of the loop for me. See a question in the back?
Yeah, when you were made a comment about, I think it was when you were doing graduate work, and you were shooting your family at that time, right? And a comment was, we don't care about your family for how long.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how that influenced what you did or didn't do?
I mean, that was one of a number of things that were said during grad school that were very pointed and not very helpful, in the moment, but they kind of lodge, like, it's a comment that lodges itself and then does its dirty work, while you sleep, right? And so then, it was somebody telling me that, like, just because you care about it doesn't make it enough, right? Like, everybody photographs their family, and so what is it that you're going to bring to the way that you're depicting them that transcends the, like, immediate kind of literal relationship that you have. And part of the challenge that I had in graduate school is, I'd be like, oh, this, I have this backstory in my head about what was going on when this picture was made. The viewer doesn't carry that, and they don't care, right? It's about, is the picture open, right, to interpretation? Can it become a vessel for the viewer's own kind of emotions, right? And so the folks in grad school were like, that's not a picture of your wife, it's a picture of a woman. That's not a picture of your family, it's a picture of a family or a group of people, right? And so we had to start pulling ourselves away from our kind of emotional knowledge of the photographic subject to try and view it a little more objectively, and through that distance, hopefully find something a little universal, but I still don't claim to understand exactly how all that works. It's just a constant battle of what stays and what goes when you're trying to whittle things down, because I tend to make more than I need for a book or a show, right? And then it's about distillation. Ben?
Speaking of like making more than you need, so I mean, it doesn't seem like you box yourself in with very rigid conceptual parameters when you're doing a project. So how do you know when a project is finished? Or when you're ready to make a book out of it, at least?
I guess when I'm tired of it, to some degree, But the last book, We the Free, was a completely different animal because it was photographs that I'd made in some cases 15 years ago. So it felt like I was editing a different person's work. And that was strange. It also meant that I had to confront all of the inadequacies of my image making in my 20s, which was a lot. So, yeah, I don't want to do that again. I would rather be like in the process of dealing with kind of what's on my mind now, right? But it was still helpful to have like something from the past to kind of grapple with while I was making something new, right? They kind of balance or inform one another in a way. So the Birdsong project kind of answers your question without answering it. The poem closes with this pretty great line. If we can get to it. Help me to lie low and leave out. Remind me that vision is singular, that excess is regress, that more than enough is too much, that compression is all. And so when I was reading this poem as a photographer, I was kind of grappling with like, what are the parallels between these two mediums? How can I think about, or like, use poetry to inform the way that I photograph? And photography, it's just like this obsessive machine churning out images of the world. And if I showed you everything that I made, we wouldn't be here right now. Like, there's no point in that, right? And so photography has always been about compression, subtraction, distillation, and I was really trying to meditate on that with this body of work and this poem, and what I've shared tonight is excess, it is regress. And so the final version is going to be whittled way down. And Ben, coming from the photojournalism world, I'm sure you probably heard the saying, edit until it hurts and then cut one more. So I haven't gotten to that point yet with this book edit.
Question about your influences. I couldn't help but notice in the shots, your daughter, your kids, like Sally Mann. So I'm taking that was definitely something.
Yeah, she is a shadow one cannot escape while living in Virginia and making black and white photos of one's family. Emmett Gowan is another huge kind of influence who also has Virginia roots, and one of my favorite contemporary photographers also in Virginia making work about family, Susan Worsham. Yeah, she's an amazing portrait artist. Holly?
I also love the beginning of that poem, actually. I mean, the beginning of the stanza of the poem. But sort of to his comment, it seems like a lot of the series overlap in dates too. So like you said, you're kind of throwing out with a certain mind and then culling and organizing later. And I think running through your work, I see a lot of love and magic and mystery and light and atmosphere and emotion, which I really appreciate. But I was also really struck by, in the presentation, all the titling and the title, the specificity of the titles and the poeticness of the titles. So I don't know if you could speak to how you go about that?
That's a good question. One of my largest influences, kind of going back to your question, is Eugene Richards, a photographer from the Northeast, grew up in Dorchester, Massachusetts, and his first wife, who died of breast cancer, was a writer, and they had a collaborative practice. They made an amazing, really like gut-wrenching book together called Exploding into Life, and when kind of studying his work, I was always really struck by the way that he used text, often in a more journalistic way, kind of transcribing interviews, but there was always a really poetic kind of musical undertone to his titles, the images, the way that he would sequence the photographs. And so that was a kind of cue that I took from Richards, I think. And I also have to confess that in my early photo days, I kind of siloed myself off from a lot of other influences. I still listen to music, but I was like, it's photo or nothing, and so I wasn't soaking in painting and poetry and all of these other things that could have shaped the work earlier. But after grad school, that was one of those things that I was like, I'm kind of bored with photography. I need to find some joy in my life from other things, and there's limits to what you can do or say with it. And whenever I get frustrated, I try and pivot to something else, just at least for some more gas in the tank.
I see that's a big part of your practice is making books, and I think I read it, or maybe you said it, that you do that in the basement. And do you mind just talking a little bit about it? I see you make very small editions for most, 250, or if you just don't mind talking a little bit about it, because they're really exquisite and very varied as well.
Thanks. So I realized at a certain point that I'd been making little kind of portfolios and zines and physical objects since I was in high school. I found a really shamefully designed little kind of like cardstock book that I taped pictures into and wrote a bad poem when I was probably like 14 or something. Would never want to share that with anybody, but it was there as a reminder that like that was kind of an early instinct or a scratch that I needed, or an itch I needed to scratch. And so I made portfolios and things through college, mostly to try and get internships and freelance work, right? And then Blurb came out, which was the print-on-demand software that kind of revolutionized things for poor folks like myself trying to make cheap books, put things into the world, and it allowed me to start thinking about sequencing a little bit differently. But of course, most of that's on the screen. And so in the basement, I've got these metal editing walls. I'm making work prints kind of as scans are finished or as images are kind of coming into a body of work. I'm churning out a little print, and I've got these tins. Everything is labeled. They go in flat files, a little obsessive about it. But then when it comes time, I clear the deck on the wall and things start to kind of fly up there and move around. And it's like a puzzle that doesn't have edges until things click together, and then you begin coming up with kind of a volley of images or like a sentence almost, that you can kind of convey a thought. And sometimes it helps to structure it like a stanza where there's some pauses or breaks or breaths in between kind of main thoughts. But photo books have been probably my biggest teacher over the years because I grew up in the sticks. I didn't get to go see shows at the MoMA and places like that. So it was photo books that were my main kind of way of engaging with a long-term body of work, multi-image, which is the way I like to work. And so what we've got here, I have been making stuff for myself, but I also have started kind of dabbling with publishing work by other folks. This was published by a different imprint, Sturm and Drang. This is a book that I made by a guy named Rich Joseph Kuhn, who's an old friend and mentor of mine who lives in Southeast Ohio. This was the last zine in a series of 8 zines that I did called Seasonal Blues. That was kind of like an exercise to keep myself sane during the pandemic. I had to make a new zine every quarter. I did that for 2 years. I Love You, I'm Leaving was the book that we looked at earlier from grad school, so I didn't publish that. Stasis, there are 2 of these thus far. Those are both self-published under Little Oak.PRESS. But our emphasis has been kind of more on like public art and accessible stuff. So these cheaper publications like Pictures and Poems or Justin Maxon's newsprint version of Field Guide for a Crisis are meant to be very cost-effective, kind of like we print a lot, but then we make them cheap so that people can spread them around, as opposed to more collectible photo books that generally institutions or only collectors would have. That has been one of my frustrations with photo books, is there's limited access, right? And so I want things to end up in kind of surprising places. And that's the goal with pictures and poems in particular, that they would land in a doctor's office waiting room, or you'd find it at the diner or something like that. So I'm trying to create different sorts of publications for different purposes. I view self-publishing as kind of like an experimental kitchen. If I was to try and play a big concert in an arena, I'm probably going to play a coffee shop first. And so the zine or a kind of like self-published thing is that, right? And then I'm testing ideas out or figuring out what a sequence might work like or look like in a publication, and then generally trying to put that out as a more like trade publication or something that's a little larger run. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes. No, I just was curious how involved you got in designing as well, or printing books.
Yeah, I'm not a designer, so I like this book, I've just kind of hacked my way through it, right? But we always try and collaborate with professional designers to make sure that things are printed and look as good as they can. We don't have press on site. I'm doing like all of the logistics and sexy computer work and stuff, and then things are printed in various places depending on like the cost and the specific project.
Thank you.
Sure. I saw another hand in the back-ish.
The bird song. I'm sorry, I'm not good with remembering names.
I know which one you're
people.
talking about. Just bird song is good enough. Yeah.
And I'm thinking about talking about graduate school and the family photo album, which she had mentioned. And with that one, it seemed like that's your dad that it starts with, and it's your dad that it ends with. And that seems like it's bookending stuff for you. And to my mind, my eye, it seems like if you're going out into the world, you're getting everybody's family and everybody and how we're all kind of connected, and it makes it the general becoming, the personal becoming more general.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's not it. And I kind of want to know, that's the way I see it, but I also want to know what you think about that. And,
I
and
love
where
that
that's
interpretation. And I guess another question that has come up is kind of like how I delineate between bodies of work, right? As you may have noticed, like these pictures and my family black and white pictures are all being made at the same time with the same tools in the same places. And I thought they were maybe part of the same thing at first, but I've since separated them. The pictures you're referring to are these that kind of appear as like a grid towards the front and the back. This was my next door neighbor, Milt. When we moved to a new home in Charlottesville in 2021, we met Milt and then met him again, and then met him again, met him again. And then as I started to observe his daily routines, I realized that he had dementia, not Alzheimer's like my grandmother, but I watched him go up and down our shared driveway like 5 or 6 times a day to check the mail. And so it took a while, and this was at a time when I was also questioning my relationship to photography and like, what am I doing? Teaching virtually, life sucks. I watched him for 2 weeks, and then I wrote a letter and I put it in the box, and I asked, I kind of spelled it out for them, like, my whole relationship to photography started with Alzheimer's disease, and I'm like watching Milt check the mail every day, and it's like breaking my heart, and also, like just surprises me, right, and kind of fills me with wonder. And it took them a while, I ran into them in the driveway a few weeks later, and they were like, oh, we got your letter, that sounds lovely, yeah. And so I photographed him for like 1.5 years. Just every time I saw him leave the house to walk up the driveway, I would run out to meet him, and I'd have to pitch it to him every time, like, hey Milt, I'm Matt, I'm your neighbor. Like, is it cool if I walk with you to the mailbox and photograph you checking the mail? And he'd be like, yeah, sure. And so he's one of the kind of characters within this broader work. The big project has a lot of small kind of I call them essayettes that have fed into the larger whole. Milt Checking the Mail is one of those, which could be like its own little zine, but he's kind of a recurring character within the work currently.
Is he still alive?
Sadly, he passed away. His wife still lives next door to us.
I got the impression, I wasn't sure who the person in the mailbox was, but I believe it was right after the last bookend, there was the lit tunnel, which very much made me feel that this person had passed on. So.
Yeah. And there was something about the tunnel that also made me think of kind of his memory, and he was at that. We had some interesting interactions in the driveway over the time that I photographed him. Sometimes things would just come kind of tumbling out of him that I tried to, like write down before it would slip through. Yeah, really interesting guy.
So, I guess I have a couple questions relating to you making this work, and it does seem like you're, kind of prolific in your shooting when you're moving from one space to another, like you're going through New England right now. And so I guess, what is the time frame between when you're making a picture and when you're looking at it? And does that distance give you more objectivity? Because obviously when you're taking photographs, you're seeing something that sparks your eye and your interest. So sometimes, photographers say they need time to be more objective to it. And then, you're teaching, you have a family and kids. So how does that all play into when you're actually taking the image, seeing the work, and how are you, reacting to that work?
It's a great question, and it's completely changed over the years, right? Like I was the last film class in undergrad, and then they had us go from slide to darkroom to digital within like 3 quarters. And I remember having this interaction with one of my undergrad advisors, and he told me he was going to fail me if I didn't start working in color, because I was so obsessed with black and white at that time. He's like, the world's in color, everything that's getting published is in color, you got to do this if you're going to survive. And I was like, all right, here we go. And so I did that for a decade, and then grad school came around, and I was like, nobody's telling me what to do now, so I'm going to go black and white. And there was something that happened where, right, the learning curve shifts. It's nice to work digitally and get that kind of instant feedback. When I was making, say, the Mississippi work, right, I would be down there sometimes for like 5 days or 2 weeks, and I'm uploading every night. I'm like coming back from a long ass day, pouring a bourbon, uploading hundreds of pictures, and then just like I would have to go through and tag down before I could fall out that night, right? And now, I'm trying to tally in my head. I shipped off 50 sheets and 29 rolls a few days ago, and I've made like another 10-ish rolls and 30-ish sheets or something like that. So first batch is off at the lab. I'll see it maybe when I get home. But I don't want to be too quick in making decisions because I don't know what the work is yet, right? And like every decision has a financial kind of association with it, like to make a scan or whatever, right? So the longer I sit with it, the more clearly I can see it, I think. But also, I'm always going to be a little bit too close, and so it's really important to have some outside eyes, just friends, colleagues that look at stuff. They've been critical in all of these projects because, I've got my own feelings, and if it doesn't translate to them, then it's probably not going to translate to anybody else, right? They're pretty astute visual readers, and so I like to draft something up and toss it at them, and they'll be like, it's good up until this point, and then at page 28 we have a little road bump, and think about that. It's so important because, again, like I can't see it clearly. I've got some colleagues that'll shoot film and then just put it in a drawer for 6 months or a year, and that's a different kind of distance. That's great. I also worry that, my camera wouldn't have been working for a period of time. So I kind of like, for financial reasons and sanity reasons, I need to know at least that I'm like getting my exposures, and beyond that, I can let it ruminate for a little while. Yeah. Other questions?
Just you said something that surprised me. You said in Europe, people are more successful in mixing black and whites and color, and you clearly have, maybe struggle is not the right word, but you've really worked in both mediums, and you've really kind of now beginning to combine them even. And just what are your thoughts? What did you learn? What
I mean,
is there anything you could share about that? Because I find it extremely difficult to combine the two.
Yeah, I would steer students away from it. If they come to me and they're like, oh, here's some black and whites and here's some color, I'm like, well, first off, let's calm this down. But sometimes, like, the world's not calm and it can't all be rendered in like one specific way.
So when do you decide to go black and white, and when do you decide to go color?
That's
or are you just struggling every time?
Struggling most of the time. I'm carrying multiple tools a lot of the time. In this trip, I have been primarily working black and white. I have pulled out the color camera, as in a camera with a roll of color in it, a couple times. And I've got some sheets of color film. It would have to really hit me in the face to, it's like a $20, pop of the shutter with a 4x5 sheet to get it made and processed. So I have to really commit, but black and white is a little easier for me to kind of make some mistakes and not hate myself for them. So I have been leaning more black and white just because it kind of takes me out of the present a little bit and does feel a little bit more timeless, and I can appreciate some of that. Also, like, I was with Walker Blackwell at a print on paper studio today. Anybody familiar with Walker's work? He's a master printer, mad scientist, guru dude, and he can make a really luscious black and white photogravure. And so sometimes you realize, like, oh, working in this one way allows me to make an image in the way that I like. And black and white has definitely started to feel more and more like my natural voice. I think a lot of my early work in color, 35, felt like I was having to kind of flag my arms to try and get attention and work to support my family and to like get attention for the stories that I was trying to tell. And then I realized that wasn't actually serving the work, or, didn't cut through the noise anymore. So why try and chase something that, isn't really there? And I'd rather try and figure out what my voice is. And that's another kind of theme within this poem, is like, from silence, the voice emerges. And so I find that black and white is a much quieter way of communicating, and that feels more akin to the way that I want to speak. Any other questions, comments?
Thank you so much, man.
Thank you guys for being here. Really appreciate all the great questions.